Hey everyone, this is Nick. I hope you like my shirt today. For those of you that can't read it, it says "Freak in the Sheets." So today I wanted to dive deeper into pivot tables. And my last video, I talked about tables real briefly and kind of ran through a quick video. This one I'm going to go in a little bit more depth to uh, to help everyone understand a little more. So the data that I got is NFL stats from 2024 for fantasy football reasons. I love fantasy football. I like looking at all the data. There's so much data to analyze. So I thought this would be good to start with. So first of all, we're gonna grab all our data, and if you want to know how I did that real quick, Control Shift over highlights that whole row. Control Shift down highlights all the way down. And now you see I have all my data selected, and I can go to Insert and Pivot. All right. This time I did a pivot chart. You could do a pivot table. Either one works. This has a visualization here. I can delete this, and then it's just a pivot table. Um, So anyways, let's talk about the different parts of the pivot table. So you'll see on this right side, we have the pivot table fields list. So that is, if you go to pivot table analyze, up here says this field list. You can unclick that. And then now that field list doesn't show up if that's how you want it. Or if you click on your pivot table again, click on this fields list, it'll show back up. And if you click off of it, it'll go away. So I'm going to leave that on and explain a little bit about this. So in this list here, we have all the different columns from our data, starting with player, team, position, etc., all the way down to fantasy points and points per reception fantasy points. And then down below that, we have these different fields. So these four different squares. So the first one's filters, so that we can filter on anything. So if we wanted to filter on position, we could filter on which position, fullback, quarterback, running back, tight end, wide receiver. We can click this button here to select multiple. We can select all of them. We can select a couple at a time, and then it'll just show us those. Then we have columns. So if we wanted to put in columns, we could do that. So we could put in how many games they played there, and then the rows, we could put which player, and so that's the rows here, and the columns are here. Makes sense? So then lastly, we'll just talk about PPR points. So we'll put that in the values. And you notice it has sum of PPR. So we could either do sum, or if we, instead of the sum of points, we could change it to sum makes the most sense in this case. Uh, but we could change it to something else like an average or a count. But right now we're going to leave it at sum. I'll show you in a little bit the cases where we want something else for that. So I'm going to get rid of this games here. So now we just see the points and the player. And what we want to do probably is we might want to look at this from largest to smallest. So let's sort on that. So we're going to right click here in this column, anywhere really. We're going to go to sort largest to smallest. All right, so we see Lamar Jackson had the most points this year. Also, I want to change the formatting just because we don't need to see the decimals since we're looking at such big numbers, right? So we have Lamar Jackson at the top, followed by Jamar Chase. We could also right click on this, sort from smallest to largest, but that's not real useful for the data that we have. So we're going to look at largest to smallest. There's also other sort options, but that's just what we're going to look at right now. So some other things you might want to do, you might want to say, okay, well that's interesting, but some guys got injured in the middle of the season or something like that. So what if I want to see like the games as well? So you can put the games here, and then you'll notice, okay, this isn't quite the format I want. So we can go up here to design, and then just in the design, we can say, okay, I don't want to see subtotals because the total, we're just talking about one item, one player, and their amount. So we're not really summing so much. So, okay, this guy played 17 games. All right, but I don't really like the formatting there. So instead of that, we can go to report layout. We can show it in more of a tabular form. So now the games go to over here. So it's in a straight line, and each line of data is only one row. That's helpful, but I want to see, maybe I want to see how many points they have per the amount of games they played. So there's a couple different ways to do this. So one way, the easier way, is you just go to your data. So this is my sheet one is my data. And I could say PPR points per per game, right? So then we're gonna say equals PPR points divided by the number of games that they played, which is right here. And we can drag this formula down. But then when we go to our data, we'll right click and refresh, or we can go to pivot table analyze and hit refresh. You'll notice that didn't show up. Why didn't it show up in the field list? That's because when we were selecting our data, we didn't include this column right here. We didn't include column A, B. So how we see that and how we can change that is go to this pivot table analyze, and we can change our data source. So you can see it goes from sheet 1 A3 to A502. So we want it to go to, instead of AA, we want it to go to AB. And we can hit OK. And now you notice this PPR points per game shows up. So then if we want, we can sort on largest smallest of points per game. And you'll notice the top couple didn't change because they all played 17 games and they had a lot of points per game, but some of the lower ones did. All right. So that's one way to do that. Another way to do that is we can we can remove this here in the data, and if we hit refresh, you'll notice that disappears. And we can just calculate it real quickly in here. So we go to pivot table analyze, field field list, or sorry, fields, item, and sets, calculated field, and we can just do that calculation here. So the name of this field, again, we'll call it PPR points per game, and the formula will be equals the PPR points. So double click that to get it up there, divided by, and we'll double click on games. And then we can hit add. Okay. And then you notice that the that's added here to the field list, and we can put it down here. You can either just click the check, and sometimes it'll put it in the right spot, sometimes it won't. This case it did. So, or we can drag it back and forth, drag it away from there, or drag it on to there. And this is the same calculation, just done slightly differently. All right, so let's get rid of this fantasy points and just leave it to points per game. Now, other things we may want to do with this data is we might want to double check this, right? So if we can add this PPR back actually. So if we want to double check that this is right, what we can do is we can do equals uh, points per reception divided by the divided by the games. And that gives us 16.68 rounded to 17. But you notice if I drag this down, it is still calculating based on the get pivot data for this first one, but the second one is using uh, B7. So it's using the exact field rather than the give pivot table data. So that's not right. It's using AJ Brown's points divided by this guy's games played. So we don't want that because that's not right. So what we want to do instead of that is we click back on our pivot table. We go to pivot table analyze. We can click on this options drop down and click on generate get pivot table data. And now if we do equals PPR divided by games, you notice it doesn't have that get pivot table anymore. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. It depends. Just want to make sure you check that. And now if we round this off, that looks like it's right. All right, so that's good. So that's one way to check that. All right, next we can get rid of this PPR and just get rid of these games as well. And let's make a chart now. So we're going to go to pivot table analyze. We're going to add a pivot chart. We're just going to do that nice and easy. Now this looks like a lot of data. So get rid of the let's get rid of the position from the filter. And for players, instead of players, let's do it by just let's see the age, right? Curious about what age scores the most points. So that's interesting. The points uh per game increases as it gets older, it looks like. But there might be an outlier there, right? We don't know how many players as well as the position. So if instead of putting the position into the filter, which we could do, and we could filter by position, a way that I like doing it so I can display it nicely is I like going to the pivot table analyze again and inserting a slicer. Base, we'll base this slicer on position. We'll hit OK. And you notice we got this nice looking thing that we can just go back and forth and say, okay, the quarterbacks are tend to be older, um, whereas the running backs tend to be younger. And if you want, you can click on this, you can clear this filter, or you can select one and hold down Control and select another one as well. So that's interesting that quarterbacks are older. So we can go over here to our pivot data, our pivot table, and we can see, okay, the points per game for quarterbacks, or sorry, yeah, for quarterbacks are 15 at 41 years old. So we can double click on this data and then it'll create a new tab to say, oh, Aaron Rodgers is 41. He's the only one at 41, and that's why we have an older player scoring all those points. Now, we don't know how many players are in each of these columns since this is an average. So what we can do is we can copy this pivot table down here. And now on this pivot table, instead of points per game, we can also say players. And we can get a count of the players. Notice how this automatically went to count. which is exactly what we wanted it to do. So that's good. And instead of sum of points per game, we could do the average points per game per player. Is probably a better way to look at this data. So now in this tab, this pivot table, we can create a chart here as well. Okay. And now we can see, okay, for running backs, it looks like there's only one, if we hover over this, yeah, there's only one running back who's 33, but there are 27 running backs that are 25. And again, we can click on this age 33 running back, and we can see Cordero Patterson is that one. And we can delete this if we want. So this shows interesting trends. Whereas for quarterback, there's a lot of quarterbacks who are younger, but only a couple who are older. And the data is pretty much doesn't seem to matter what age they are as far as how many they score, how many points they score, but it tends to be a lot more that are around the 25, 26 years old. Running backs, right around 25, there's the most, and then it tapers off and tend to score the most points right around 27 or 30. And we can look at that data and say, oh, who's this 30? These 30-year-olds scoring a lot of points. And you have, oh, Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones are scoring a lot of points. That makes sense. So then we can delete that. Or if we wanted to, we could also put the player down here. Oh, it doesn't like that. Uh, because we have data that it's going to overlap. It's going to overlap with this pivot chart down here, this pivot table down here. So that's everything I wanted to show on pivot tables today, but I really appreciate you joining in today. And let me know if there's any questions that you have down in the comments. I'll have the spreadsheet full of data if you want to try to follow along with this. And please like and subscribe to my video and my channel. Thanks so much. Have a good one.